Greetings historians, welcome back to the channel. In this video we're going to be trying to answer the question, what started the Cold War? We're going to be dealing with the early period today, so from the Tehran conference in 1943 up until the USSR tests the atomic bomb in 1949. The big question today is, who was to blame, why did the Cold War happen, and why did the Grand Alliance fall apart? The Cold War doesn't sound very cool to me. And if we're wondering who's behind the Cold War, well, I really think we should start with talking snowmen. So in terms of some context here, the Grand Alliance was between the US, the UK and the USSR. You would be hard-pressed to describe this as anything other than an alliance of convenience. It was fundamentally based on the idea that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Nothing could have ever made the US, the UK and the USSR work together other than an existential threat to civilization like Nazi Germany. So the alliance was only ever going to be temporary. It was strong at Tehran because Germany still existed and there was still a war to be won. The cracks are starting to show at Yalta because they're starting to disagree over things like the division of Germany, the status of Poland. We know for a fact that from the very start Churchill didn't trust Stalin because Operation Unthinkable, he proposes the idea of invading the Soviet Union in 1946. By the time he gets to the Potsdam Conference though, with the three guys at the bottom, things are pretty frosty. They aren't being very warm to each other. Do you get it? So by 1946, the Cold War is well underway. So they've been allies in 1945, but by 1946, the Cold War has 100% started. Why? Well, that's what we're going to try and answer today. Firstly, the Cold War was caused by ideological differences. The West is capitalist and the USSR is communist. The big existential question here is, could there ever be peaceful coexistence between two ideologies, two systems of trying to understand the world that are just so diametrically opposed to each other? If you're unsure about the definitions and the differences between communism and capitalism, there's this really good YouTube channel called @MrTullyHistory who has a video on Marxism, Leninism, communism, capitalism, and explains everything you need to know. It's really, really good. We know that ideology is a cause of the Cold War because the beef goes all the way back to 1917 when the Bolsheviks take over Russia in October 1917. There's also a great video about that on my channel. The US, Britain, Germany, France, Japan, Austria-Hungary, all these countries send troops to fight against the Bolsheviks. All of these countries from the very, very start are very scared about the idea of a communist country. Even before the word containment or domino theory is even mentioned, they want to stop the spread of communism. So the ideological differences were present from the start and caused conflict from the very, very start. What I've got on every slide here is a bold definition. This is something you could use in your essays. This is something you can use to inform your planning. Ideology caused the Cold War because capitalism and communism are two juxtaposing, I got a good grade in English GCSE, juxtaposing visions of how the world should work. Therefore, they were fundamentally incompatible. Unless you ask Khrushchev thought that peaceful coexistence was possible. Then, ideology caused the Cold War, but also Stalin caused the Cold War. Stalin feels entitled to what he calls the spoils of war. Basically, he has done the heavy lifting in World War II. The great quote that is always used to describe World War II is that it was won with British brains, woohey, American money, and Russian blood. 20 million Soviet citizens died during World War II. Best example, or worst example, depends who you ask, is the Battle of Stalingrad, where it was months of brutal room-to-room, house-to-house fighting. The main reason, really, that Nazi Germany is defeated is because of the war in the East. Stalin's meat grinder tactic, his Order 227, not a step back, he is the reason, really, that World War II is won. Therefore, he feels entitled to a bit of the spoils of war. Stalin, as you know, if you watch my previous videos, he is a deeply paranoid person. He has been, well, one, his country has been invaded 3 times by Germany in his lifetime. So as a result of this, he wants what he calls a buffer zone, a sphere of influence. He wants a lot of territory between him and his enemies, and he feels that because of World War II, he deserves this. 1945, Stalin does something a little bit sketchy, where he gets to Berlin earlier than he said he was going to, and the reason he does that is because he wants some of the nuclear facilities that the Nazis have been working on. This is quite suspicious here, because Stalin isn't supposed to know that America is working on an atomic bomb. This reveals that he's been spying. At Potsdam, like I've just said, Truman thinks it's going to be a big dun-dun-dun moment when he announces the atomic bomb's been tested. Stalin's not surprised. That's suspicious. He also promised elections in Eastern Europe, but through various means, his salami tactics, rigged basically all of them. That is very suspicious. And Stalin caused the Cold War because his paranoia, justified, and lack of trust in the West, also justified, made him act in a way that heightened Western suspicion of Soviet motives. It's one of those cyclical logic things with Stalin. He is suspicious, so he acts in a way that makes people more likely to be suspicious of him. Lost my train of thought there. Also, the Cold War can be blamed on ideology, it can be blamed on Stalin, but it has to be blamed on Truman also. So Truman replaces FDR as president, Hitler's gone, the USSR is no longer useful, and Truman thinks that he needs to, quote, get tough with Stalin. He thinks that Roosevelt was being a bit too nice to someone. Obviously, Stalin was an awful mass-murdering psychopath, and Truman thinks that we need to treat him as such. Stalin's view of Truman is, who the hell is this guy? He begrudgingly liked Roosevelt. They've worked together for, well, 7 years in World War II, but Truman has come up on the scene at the very, very end and now is trying to get tough with Stalin. He's probably thinking, who even is this guy? Truman does a few things that are a bit naughty. He delays the Potsdam Conference until after a successful atomic bomb test because he thinks it's going to intimidate Stalin. Stalin's not fazed. Then he makes his Truman Doctrine in the Greek Civil War and his Marshall Plan, basically saying that the US will support any country financially who is fighting communism. Also, Truman is associated with the idea of containment and domino theory, so his foreign policy is explicitly hostile to what he calls the spread of communism, which, ironically, makes Stalin even more committed to spread communism in Eastern Europe to get that buffer zone he's so desperate for. So Truman caused the Cold War because he was explicitly hostile to Stalin, where FDR had tolerated him as a useful tool in the struggle against Nazism. Roosevelt needed Stalin, Truman doesn't. Truman is scared of communism. He knows that Stalin wants to spread it at least a little bit, and he is committed to stopping that. Germany is a really big issue. So ideology, Stalin, Truman, and now Germany. Germany created the Grand Alliance. It seems only fitting that Germany helped end the Grand Alliance. Whoa, deep, cyclical. Mr. Tully, you are such a good teacher. I can't believe I get the privilege of these videos for free. NordVPN, if you're listening, please sponsor me. So, after World War II, there are two very different visions on what they want the future of Germany to be. The West wants a strong Germany to avoid war. They've learned a little bit from the Treaty of Versailles. The East, the USSR, wants to destroy Germany to avoid war. Both countries want to prevent a future war. Germany, now, I don't know if any of you guys are history buffs, but Germany has gone to war with the world twice. So their first big disagreement is over the future of Germany. At Yalta Conference, they agree that Germany will be divided into 4 zones. The USSR gets the East. That's the worst part. At Potsdam, they change the plan and they say that rather than Germany paying reparations, reparations will be taken from the zones that each country controls. The USSR is a bit annoyed about this because they've got the worst bit and Berlin is in their zone, but they don't get Berlin. They only get half of Berlin. Now, the first crisis of the early Cold War is all centered around Berlin, with Stalin blockading it and then the ensuing airlift. So Germany caused the Cold War because its surrender ended the Grand Alliance, and the debate surrounding its reconstruction heightened hostility between the US and USSR. And then finally, mutual fear is a big factor here. The US and the USSR were both suspicious of one another's intentions. The Long Telegram by George Kennan suggested that firm containment of the Soviet Union was required. He basically stirs up a bit of paranoia in America and says that the Soviet Union wants to dominate the world. Then the Novikov telegram by the Soviet ambassador, Mr. Novikov, says that the USA is bent on world domination and must be checked. So effectively we have a system where a situation where the US thinks the USSR is trying to dominate the world, the USSR thinks the USA is trying to dominate the world, and therefore they act in a way that increases suspicion of each other. The thing I've got here is mutual fear caused the Cold War because it caused the US to pursue a policy of containment and the USSR to commit to securing a buffer zone in Eastern Europe, dividing the continent and heightening post-war tensions. So the big reasons why there is a Cold War, everyone, are ideology, Stalin, Truman, Germany, and the mutual fear. You ask me about the Cold War. Doesn't sound very cool to me. I think everyone just needs to chill. Why is everyone being so frosty? Can we not just, warm to each other a little bit? Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. NordVPN, if you're listening, please sponsor me.